Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon with Hyde Park United Methodist in Tampa, Florida. I'm Mat Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement.
And I'm Magrey deVega, the Senior Pastor.
So Magrey, you just preached a sermon on the drum major instinct. Is kind of what I felt as I was kind of going through it, this idea of how we really want attention. Yeah. Right? We really want to be the center of attention or get lauded for what we do. Did I kind of pick that up generally in what you were saying? And then the answer is to not actually want that, to want something different.
Absolutely. And frankly, I don't know if the drum major instinct is a metaphor that applies to all people. Certainly, it's a marching band metaphor. And I don't know about you. I was not in a marching band.
I was not
Were you
either.
in a marching
no,
band?
But I did play in a band, so it was fun to.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Okay.
But for those of you who don't know, the drum major is the one who stands up on a pedestal before the entire field, before the band. And they're the ones that are closest to the crowd, and they're the ones that are directing everybody. Ironically, the drum major is the only one in the band that doesn't make a sound. They are the one that gets all the attention because they are the ones who are seemingly in control. But the reality is they are the ones who are trying to elicit the sound from everybody else. They're the ones who are trying to get the best out of everyone, which itself is a kind of servanthood. But that's not the way Wallace Hamilton or MLK were using it. They were saying the drum major is the one who attracts all the attention, which is not meant to disparage any of you who were drum majors.
Sure,
it's just a metaphor.
Well, and I think it gets to this tension within all of us that is like, oh man, like attention is fun.
It is.
I don't know how to be, but I think both of us can be pretty honest about how it feels nice when you get attention.
Absolutely. And so if you look at the full manuscript of MLK's sermon, and if you want to take a look at the full Wallace Hamilton sermon, they really do diagnose just how much we do want to feel praised and affirmed. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, feeling affirmed, feeling encouraged, it can be a good thing. Like all the other emotions, Wallace Hamilton says in his book, like all other emotions, it needs a guardrail because when taken to an extreme, it could be harmful to oneself and to others.
So to say it's okay to want to climb the corporate ladder.
Absolutely.
With a guardrail on to not lose sight of serving.
That's right.
To be a humble CEO, to be a humble manager, a humble leader.
Yeah. And the word that I like to come back to is values. That what you want to make sure of is that you hold on to the values that define you as a follower of Jesus. And according to Jesus, one of those incontrovertible values for us is humility and servanthood. Not to say we should never try to be better or to, as you say, move up, but to do it with a spirit of humility and generosity and obedience. Mm-hmm. That's an important guardrail for us, the values that we keep.
Yeah, I remember when I was in youth group, something happened at some point where it felt like the culture was a really healthy culture of when you are a 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader, you get access to more leadership. But that comes with the expectation that you're leading from humility.
Right.
And then at some point, someone saw that as entitlement and took those opportunities away.
Right.
And I think some culture got lost there. I think we lost the ability to see that, no, giving kids who are getting ready to launch out into college the opportunity to lead is a privilege and a responsibility to give them that when it's couched in also doing that from humility, not as well, I'm just an 11th grader, so I get to do this.
I think what's great about that anecdote is that it reminds us that all of us go through these stages of development from young personhood to young adulthood, where those kinds of values are clarified within us. They are kind of benchmark moments where we decide, how are we going to live as an adult? Which, by the way, translates to the development of early Christianity and the early Christian communities. So at the time that the Gospels were written, these fledgling Christian communities were starting to become more mature in who they wanted to be as Christian communities. So it's no surprise that by the time the Gospels were written, at least the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all record some version of this story with some differences, right?
Yeah. So this will be a nice little Bible highlight for you guys who are a bit more Bible nerdy or just want to read your Bible with a little bit more, what do we say?
Finesse?
What's that line? No. It was something we said during Bible Project. Who want to read the Bible without fear or frustration.
There you go.
Right? And read it with confidence, right?
Yeah.
So something that happens in the synoptics, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is they'll tell the same story, but differently, right? So this story from the sermon today is actually told in 3 different places. It's told in Matthew 20, like Magrey mentioned, in verses 20 through 28. This is also told in Mark 10, 35 through 45, and it's in Luke 22, 24 through 27. So you can go to all three of those places in your Bible and kind of maybe hold them with your fingers and flip through and kind of see the differences. And I'll point out a couple of the differences for us. I think they're fun.
Great.
So there's a good chance that Mark's version was the first version, and Matthew and Luke took that version and kind of made it fit to their context, some stuff like that. So Matthew decided at the beginning to not have the two disciples ask it, but the disciples' mom ask it, which, as you found in your sermon, is also something that Matthew does again in 27, where he has that same character reappear. Right? In some way. So clearly Matthew was trying to tell a story there about how this character's arc continued through the story, which I think is really cool. Luke does something really cool when he tells this story. Luke gives these really great examples because he just really wants his audience to understand what's happening, and he was just a really good writer and teacher. So he said, included in there, so which one is greater, the one who is seated at the table or the one who serves at the table? So, right, like y'all sit around tables, right? Who's greater, the one who's seated or the one who serves? Isn't the one who is seated at the table the one who's greater? But I am among you as one who serves. So Jesus is saying to the disciples, y'all know this familiar thing around sit around the table. Well, you might think that I'm the one who actually wants to sit at the table and be served by you all, but I'm actually going to be the one who's bringing you the meal.
Right. And that is typical of Luke's rhetorical approach, where Jesus zigs one way and then zags another. We see that right from the very beginning of his gospel, where through the Magnificat of Mary and the Song of Zechariah and all throughout the early part of the chapters, Luke is setting the cultural context and then undermining it, or flipping conventional wisdom upside down. And so it's not a surprise that Jesus doubles down on this conversation with James and John with this metaphor of the servant being greater than the one seated at the table.
And these arguments about greatness, they occur elsewhere also, like again in Matthew 18, where Jesus has to use a child as an example and is like, hey, the whoever is greatest will be least, and whoever is least will be greatest. Now, here's something I want to say about these parallels real quick, in brief, and then I have other questions for you.
Sure.
When you see things like this in the Bible, where the same story is told 3 times, that doesn't mean that like someone made a mistake or that the Bible can't be trusted. The Bible is doing something really different here. In fact, the communities, I should say not the Bible, but the communities that wrote these texts are doing something really unique here. They're telling a story from their distinct perspectives, just like any of us would. If Magrey was to go to a Rays game and tell me what he experienced at a Rays game, it'd be different than what I experienced at a Rays game than what Decker experienced at a Rays game. Because we're maybe sitting in different areas, or maybe we like different players and we're following different parts of the action, but the same game happened. So when these things happen in the Bible, don't think that you can't trust the Bible. It's actually the way the Bible is a living, breathing document formed by communities. Speaking of being formed by communities, that's shifting gears without a clutch.
No, I think you're tracking great.
You talked about growing up in Pasadena United Methodist Church, or Pasadena Community Church. And while J. Wallace Hamilton was long gone by the time you got there, I would imagine that his legacy pervaded through that church.
Absolutely. There was a long shadow cast by J. Wallace Hamilton all throughout the succeeding preachers and the congregation that followed, including the time in the 70s when my parents and I started going to that church. J. Wallace Hamilton really set the expectation high of the power of preaching. And so he was succeeded by Tom Kelsey, and then Ed Norman, who was the pastor who welcomed us into membership, followed by my mentor, Jack Stroman. All 3 of those pastors, and the pastors who have since followed, are incredible preachers. And I remember sitting there, in my case, under Jack Stroman, just marveling at the depth of biblical insight, the strength and confidence of his delivery, and the applicability to contemporary current affairs, all of which were hallmarks of J. Wallace Hamilton. And at the time that I was sitting there as a youth under Jack Stroman, I had no idea of what I would be doing for a living for the rest of my career. But I do remember thinking about the power of rhetoric, the power of speech, and the way that it can elicit emotion and information, inspiration. And so in some ways, what I do now is part of the long lingering shadow of J. Wallace Hamilton and the preachers that followed him.
I wonder if J. Wallace Hamilton went by J because you were impacted by Jack Stroman. Obviously, we're all impacted by Jesus. I was impacted by Jack Stevenson and John Legg and Jacqueline. And you were impacted by Jim Harnish. I mean, geez.
Yeah.
Geez with a G, with a J, though.
Really, to pay this guy super tribute, I wonder if we could develop a Broadway musical after Wallace Hamilton.
Oh man, how does a $10 founding preacher without a pulpit in a Pasadena? Yep, nope.
We are not editing any of that out.
I didn't know where I was going with that one. That Hamilton's also too good to kind of try and
You bet.
Okay, so finally, we would be remiss, I think, if we didn't touch on Martin Luther King's legacy, what you also touched on in the sermon, which is his sermon on a drum major's instinct. And it's so haunting sometimes to listen to King's speeches, but how he wanted to be remembered, especially 60 years down the road, right? He would be assassinated shortly after that. And he just said, don't remember me for all the greatness. Remember me for what I did to make a difference. How's that shaped you?
There are two parts of King's legacy that I think are incredibly relevant for us today. One of the common themes you hear from church people and even people outside the church is that preachers should not talk about politics. And it is just hard to imagine the ongoing of witness of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as anything but speaking into the harsh political realities of his time. And one of the ways we live into that today is to be bold and confident to speak about the chaos and uncertainty that we're living in as a nation and as a country. And it would be an appropriate question to ask, what would MLK say today if he were still around? And it's not a hard thought exercise to do, because we can see by his writings and by his preaching that he would be very prophetic in the kinds of things that need to be addressed today, with the injustices, the atrocities, the upendedness of our politics. But at the same time, he would remind us of our values, the values that are completely grounded in our Judeo-Christian tradition, and remind us, here's the other thing I think about with MLK, that the presence of peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. And as much as we're called to be peacemakers today, it does not mean avoiding the tough matters or avoiding conflict or avoiding saying hard things, but advocating for justice and equality, not only within our interpersonal relationships with each other, but within our broken systems. And so one of the ways that we can honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the ways that we can view his sermons and reflect on his writings, is not just to take a day off from our normal business activities, but to get involved and to serve and to right the wrongs and to embody his witness, not just listen to it. And to remember that in the act of preaching, the best preaching engages the difficult current affairs of our day. I think Dr. King showed us that. Dr. J. Wallace Hamilton showed us that. And preaching at its best in the prophetic lineage can do the same.
I don't really have a lot to say after that. I think I'm reminded of Kingian nonviolence.
Yes.
I can't.
Absolutely.
We had the privilege of having someone teach us that when we were kids in our youth group.
Yep.
We did retreats on it. And man, that actually, that stopped me in my tracks this week. What does Kingian nonviolence mean in this week, this month? This, what does that look like anymore? How do you practice that in a world of deep fakes and of shattered norms of truth? How can you be confident in a nonviolent resistance? So that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'll be thinking about tomorrow for a long time.
Beautiful.
Hey, we hope that you guys will engage with us on this content. And by that, I mean, if you have thoughts about how to honor Martin Luther King's legacy, put it in the chat on this YouTube video. Engage with it. We'll engage back. We're not afraid of engaging with this content in the online space. And if you want to know more about our church, you can go to hydeparkumc.org/next steps, where you can figure out how to join us for worship online or in person, join a small group, one of our justice ministries, anything at all. So I'm Mat Hotho.
And I'm Magrey deVega.
We'll see you next time.